Hello, Ramon. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, Lian, it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Oh, we have already been having, a very multi-dimensional conversation, haven't we? I think this is going to
We
be a
have,
really
yeah.
good one.
Yeah.
And we actually had a struggle choosing a topic because we were kind of literally going all around the universe. But we both have been really present recently, and I'll share kind of my experience of this first. Around the way that so many people, certainly in kind of my, my circle of clients, friends, just everyone that I'm present to, there seems to be this very clear pattern of people starting to question the way they're going about business, the way they are in kind of like financial exchanges with people, where that's coming from, the way that things have been kind of like conditioned as like that's just the way it is, or even the way it should be, and you need to move towards that, and then starting to realize like that no longer makes sense to me. That doesn't feel right. And this is even people who, so much of the work we do at Wake the Wild is really helping people to connect much deeper to their soul in the creation of their life and their business, really discovering that medicine they are. Even those people who are already, so much more aware of these things, it's like there's been this like another level of opening to look clearly at like, what's actually going on here? Why am I going about business in this way? And there's certainly been something that Jonathan and I, the co-founder of Wake the Wild, have been in this really deep contemplation about over the last, well, for many years, but particularly in the last year. But as I say, this feels as though it's more something in the collective that's happening, that's calling us to be honest about these things and look at these things in a deeper way. So I'd love to know what's been showing up for you.
Yeah, well, so for me, I would be in the classification of one of those people that you're discussing who's facing the same challenges and the same contemplations around the business and how to approach that and how creativity and spiritual practice weaves into that, as well as the role of business in the collective in terms of the changes that we're making and that we're trying to call into this world. And a big part of the work that I do with clients does not revolve around business. So for me, it's been more about myself and the communities that I'm involved in around business that I have seen these same issues coming up. And so, like I was telling you recently, just before we started talking here, that one of my teachers, whose name Fabeku Fatunmi said, just had a big conversation around community and how here in the West, we really don't have uh, what we would call very functional or healthy communal dynamics because, in a lot of ways, Western civilization puts you into this isolated box of you are in your farm and I am on my farm. And if your crops don't grow, that's kind of your problem.
It's on you. Yeah.
But if my crops grow, then I'm okay. And this type of isolated, bordered thinking has really interwoven itself into our culture on a wide variety of levels, and especially also shows up on business. And the epitome of that
I
is
just got to
corporations.
say, I love that naming of bordered really hit me. Like it literally is like you say, this is my farm. This is where the border of me and mine starts and ends, and this is yours. And, I'm not really that fussed about what happens that side of the border. Like that really hit me, that word. It's like it's happening at so many levels, isn't it? It's like a material level, but an energetic level to match that, which is so not what our cultural heritage has been before the advent of farming, this bordered thinking. That word really hit me.
Yeah, cool. Well, I mean, it just came in, so you can have it. So the idea here is that overall this idea has really been epitomized in corporations and in the factory mindset, and how it basically uses and commodifies human beings and the natural world as a resource that it can extract from, which is one of the words that came in from this
Mm.
conversation with this conversation my teacher was having, that basically then has spilled over, because a big part of our business models in the modern world come from corporations and from this bordered way of thinking into our lives, even for people who are trying to be conscious of how they run business and not exploit people. I think there's simply layers of that interwoven into how a lot of us are thinking. And I think that at some level, because as you were saying, it's not a part of our cultural heritage, we are tribal creatures, that there's a sense at this point that something is off. And
Yeah, we feel that at the deepest level, like it's
yeah,
even those of us who have kind of managed, like we've managed to make the game work according to the kind of modern cultural lens around business and money, maybe even and especially, it doesn't feel good. It feels like, yeah, this doesn't feel right. It calls us back to something that's actually much truer for us. Yeah, carry on.
yeah, and so like that you can't escape it, basically, to some level, at this point. Like, it's not up to us. Like he was saying, I'm going to reference him a lot because I'm paying homage and respect to the fact that I was literally just in this conversation listening. But he was talking about how,
Although strangely, it was me that brought the like, love the synchronicity. It was me that suggested it, wasn't it?
yeah, it is you
Yeah.
who suggested it, which is kind of interesting. We fundamentally can't escape it, in some ways. That it's the game is built in such a manner that, at some level, unless you leave the civilization, that you're having to touch aspects of it. Even though I do think there are other ways to define the game and to change the rules of the game, but we can go there later if you want. But yeah, that's what's been alive for me. And it's interesting. I actually went through a pretty deep emotional death and rebirth process around this conversation, because I had a negative reaction to parts of what he was saying in that talk. Uh, because at some level, I think that one of the most spiritual things that we can do in general, this doesn't mean to sit idly by and accept, but to embrace what is and to face that head on, as that's what you got, right? And so the way that I've orientated towards this understanding of Western civilization is that it's a part of the 21st century. It's the culture that I exist in. So I'm just going to do my best to deal with that and make what I need to do work. And so I heard him talking about this, and it bothered me. And it took days for me to understand why it was bothering me. And then I was meditating, and all of a sudden I had this huge bursting open of my heart, and I realized, oh, I a big part of what's bothering me is that I am in pain around this. I am in pain around the fact that I exist in a culture where, if I'm unwell, if I am depressed, if I am sick, if I can't figure out how to monetize my gifts, then I'm pretty much left to die on my own, so to speak. Like, I could literally end up on the streets, homeless and alone and dead, if I don't make this capitalistic idea of the world work.
Yeah.
And I think I had not really acknowledged that pain, because in some ways I felt as if it would not be helpful to acknowledge that pain, perhaps. I don't know. But the conversation itself made me really look at that. And then it opened up my heart for other people. And I realized that there was this subtle judgment for me about people who couldn't also make it work, probably because I was judging myself. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have compassion for people who were the outliers of society, because I've always like donated to homeless people, and I've always had that type of understanding of the pain that they're in. But there was still this subtle judgment of, like, people just need to make it work. And at some level, that's true, because that's reality. But at another level, it hurts me deeply that we exist in that type of culture, because we don't really have this communal idea to fall back on, because that was a big part of the talk, was about how to reanimate community in our culture, and that we don't really have really good ideas of community in Western culture, because we're just not built that way. And I do think fundamentally that we can try, but that we could never have at this point the same level of community that you would have, let's say, in an indigenous culture, where community is literally what you grow up in. That the structure of the society itself is based around community. That if you are unwell, that if you are sick, that or whatever the case may be, something takes you out of being productive, that there's support there for you. And that you literally are woven into that matrix from the day you are born. Like, we cannot have that in this generation, because
we can't.
It's simply not possible. So, the best we can do is figure out better ways of being in community. And for him, the way that he promotes it, well, let me not say that. I don't know every layer of what he promotes. But one of the ideas that popped up is, business and how we show up with business. This was an aspect of the talk, right? Is how business can be helpful in the context of community, and thinking more broadly in terms of wanting what we do to have communal spillovers, so that it's not just about you and you being happy, so to speak. I mean, that's a part of it, of course, but that the work we're doing is thinking more about how we create nodes of helping more and more people, and making the work we do more accessible to people, which is, there's a difference, I suppose, between, being someone who only works. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this. I'm only pointing out the difference for usefulness here. There's a difference between someone who only works with 5 or 6 clients in like a 2-month period and charges them $15,000-$20,000 for whatever, versus someone who creates communities with different levels of potential engagement, where the magic that you do, the medicine that you have, can actually spill over into all the layers of that community and help a lot of people along the way. So for me, it's asking me to kind of take a look at what I even want to build further with my business, and what impact I can make at what level, and things like that, right? I've been really meditating with that lately.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I love this conversation so much. So there's a couple of things that I noticed in what you were saying. There was one point where, so I'm going to start here actually. Community is something that from quite early on in our business, so we've been in business partnership now for 9 years in various evolutions, and from quite early on it was clear that a vital aspect of our role and kind of what we were here to create was community. And it's been really interesting over those years starting to understand, like, we have no clue about community for all the reasons you said. It's like we have this idea of community, and that's how we started. And then over the years, it's just like, oh my goodness, it's each layer where we think we've created community. It's like it was only like what was possible based on our current understanding, and that's constantly being kind of like almost like crumbled and rebuilt. I had a conversation maybe 2 years ago now, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years ago, with Tad Hargrave from Marketing for Hippies, and we had a great conversation about this, where it was a similar conversation. Is, ultimately what we're trying to create as, people creating forms of community in this modern culture, especially when it's a business. This is my community. It's not really a community. Like, let's be really honest about that. Like, the true meaning of the word isn't that. And it doesn't mean there isn't a role for it. again, all of this is like, if we're being called to it, it's probably because there's something in this for us. And we don't necessarily need to know like the end game. We don't need to have all the answers, but just recognize there's a calling towards this, which again, for me is definitely true. And something we very consciously began weaving into our work over the years was this like recognition, like this is a community of sorts, you know, whatever we're creating. Say, for example, it's a circle of 11 people who are going on a kind of, you know, 6-month journey together. That's a community. But if it just stops there, if people aren't able to kind of like take some of that essence and bring it out into their lives, into their local, not just a community of humans, but, you know, the community they have with their local land and other beings around them and other humans, it is kind of like, it feels like, you know, like artificial, like plasticky, you know, like if we're really wanting to be serious about like bringing that kind of like true heart of community as best we can in that limited fashion, if it doesn't include empowering people to make different choices in their actual lives, in the creation of, again, still not true community, but a kind of like a step towards it, a step that is based in their local land, in their relationships, then we're not actually helping to create community. So that was something we started to become very aware of a number of years ago. And then it's been really humbling. I may have mentioned the last conversation we had. My teacher, Jez Hughes, is a British shaman, but we're very like have a very close lineage with the Wirrakuta Mexican shamans. And so they are, you know, indigenous community, true community. And it's like, oh my goodness, like everything you're talking about here, like they are like bound together through true need. And the more I have like even the taste of that, the more, you know, that pain you're experiencing, like that longing and pain, like, you know, we just don't have that. You know, however much we might want to move in that direction, we can't have that. And it's like been really humbling to like really like notice, like I may have all these grandiose ideas of like, you know, we're creating community, like we're not creating that. But that doesn't mean there's no reason to not move in the direction we're being called. So this feels like such a, you know, this is like paradoxical, nuanced conversation. But I love what we're talking about here, because I think it really is, again, the conversation that's kind of half happening, but not fully consciously, but people are feeling this.
Sure, yeah. To kind of reference one of the metaphors that was brought up in our last talk, I think it's another layer of this regrowing of the tail, right? The lizard regrowing its tail. And that in a sense, we're modern humans in the modern world who are living in a societal context that is relatively new to the human species. And we're seeing the old model. Well, the old model is actually the wrong word. That new model, the underpinnings of it not working fundamentally. It just doesn't work for the things that are truly meaningful to human beings. And
that feels really powerful, actually. You know, just to say that, like, it's not working. It's not. It's not.
Yeah, it really isn't. And so then here we are, trying to figure out what we can do to create I don't want to use the word substitute, because fundamentally we have to live with it as authentically as we can, right? So it's more about how do we create these new structures in the context of the modern world with these inherited baseline needs that we have as an animal, as a creature on this planet, to be a tribal creature, and also a creature that's in tune with the environment in and of itself, right? That we are recognizing more and more that this idea of isolation is simply inaccurate, and in a way, what one could think of it as a type of hallucination, really. Because it's clear at every level that we are interrelated systems, that each of us is what we might call slightly individual, but also fundamentally that there's a paradox in that we're also deeply connected to everything else, right? Everything about our bodies, for example, it's constantly exchanging with the environment, right? At the level of spirit, we know that we are not isolated beings, that we ride currents that are transpersonal and that move beyond us, and that we engage with these forces and they move through us and we move through them. And I think that those understandings at some level are trying to come through when it comes to business and how we perceive what we do. And how we bring those deeper understandings into the work, and also how we transmit that idea to the people we work with, right? So it's one of the things I know you do, absolutely, because your work revolves around getting people to inhabit their gifts and to align with their soul and to bring that to the world. And a part of what I do when I'm working one-on-one with clients is that I'm very interested in helping them get to the point where they can bear the fruit of what they're here to do, right? To create that fruit, to give it back. The word that I use is destiny, or that is aligning with destiny, whatever that is. But I also think that I have had layers of that work for me, which are fundamentally still showing up in this Western of idea of you are on your own and you got to get it done. And there's a lot of pressure on you to figure it out. And in a community setting, that really wouldn't happen. And like in Yoruba culture, I'm not an expert in Yoruba culture, but I do study that culture because that's the root of the spiritual traditions that I grew up in, and so I'm very interested in that. And from the beginning, your gifts are being fostered. I mean, I've heard you guys talk about that on one of your podcasts, that that's all just interwoven into how you grow up, right? Whereas for us, we got to get past whatever personal issues we're dealing with in the context of the modern world, right? And then we have to either overcome those things or learn to kind of carry them in such a way that they're not an interference to us. And then we have to alchemize whatever we have to alchemize. And then we have to learn to monetize those gifts. And then we bring that same idea to the economy. And it's really tough. It's really tough on people, and the fact that it is so tough, I think, is painful for a lot of us. And I think at some level, it's easy to harden around that and to then bring those same ideas to people, and that be a part of how we bring them through their process, right?
Yes, like it's baked in. It's baked into the work. Yeah,
it is baked into the work. And I don't think that's like our fault. I think it's just simply our experience. And I'm not really sure how to approach it differently. I'm trying to figure that out, right? I think acknowledging the pain is helpful, and I think also recognizing that on a deeper evolution, deep time perspective, our species has not really had to deal with that, and that it wouldn't just be on us to do these things, but that there would be usually deep layers of communal support to help you, and that we're all just trying to figure out what to do next and how to help move the world forward, right? So
yeah, I love that. There's so much I want to say in response. The first thing is, you said something in our last episode that I'm going to paraphrase it as I kind of received it. I don't think you said it in these words, but this is how it landed for me. And I've actually probably repeated it more times to other people than I probably repeated any other thing anyone's ever said to me on this podcast. So that's a claim to fame. You said something along the lines of, we were talking about animism. And you said something along the lines of, like, we were talking about how it's that, original kind of knowing, that is a kind of like original way of understanding the world. And then you said something like, it's not just the original, it's the innate worldview. It's the innate way of experiencing. Do you remember saying something of that ilk? You didn't say quite those words, but basically it's like, it's not just a kind of a return back, it's actually a return back to what's actually innate to every human right now.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like something I would say, because innate is definitely a word that I am orientating towards. Not just a word, right, but what that word represents. Trying to find the innate more and more that has just been overshadowed, and repressed, suppressed, conditioned away, whatever. Yeah, and animism, as far as I can tell and from my experience, is the innate baseline way of human beings relating to the universe. And that it takes a lot of conditioning to try to get rid of it. And I don't think that it's done well anyway. So I don't think you really can fully get rid of it.
You can't. And that's what was so, like, when you said that, it was just like, I had this embodied, like, knowing that's it. That's exactly it. And I kind of knew that all along, but I'd never quite named it in that way. And that is so beautiful and hopeful, because it feels so much more accessible when it's just, you know, under some layers of conditioning, versus having to reach back, you know, pre-agriculture to try and reclaim it. Like, it felt like, oh my goodness, it's that close. And the reason that came to, I would say, that's something that has really, you saying that landed me so deeply. It's like, again, I've repeated it constantly, so crediting you. And
you.
the reason that came to mind just then was when you were saying about, you know, this is something that we kind of like, it is already speaking through us, isn't it? It's like that innate knowing is already present, albeit it's kind of filtered through the conditioning. And so, yes, the conditioning does need to be removed, cleared, healed, but it's like, what's there is that it's like that innate knowing of everything being interconnected. And then it was like, it's so interesting when we think of us, again, this idea of these like bordered, you know, this is my farm, this your farm. It's so clear that that's just only true at like a very superficial level, because it's not true. Like, we can't really border ourselves. And it was just like, that's what we're starting to remember. It's like the borders are nonsense. Like, we just don't operate that way. And then the last thing that I was really feeling in your words at the end was this, like, just real deep compassion for all of us, you know, like just doing our best as children who have been just so bereft of the things that are like most important, most necessary. And something I was pondering earlier, which links to this, is what I've noticed is people, as they start to come into this inquiry, is that they often feel real shame for their participation in, like, you know, some of those, you know, business practices, which, you know, could be seen as quite predatory, you know, just whether that be like quite pushy sales techniques or like really super high rates, whatever it might be. And then starting to recognize, like, actually, you know what, that doesn't make sense to me anymore. That doesn't feel good, but it can bring up a lot of shame. And I'm really feeling this, like, you know, I think in general, having that kind of real compassion for ourselves is needed. But I think with this in particular, because it's so, again, it's like, how could we have done differently? How could we have done differently?
Yeah. I think that the shame is probably normal. So not to put shame on feeling shame, right? It's probably
Yeah.
it's probably a normal response to being put into a situation that we weren't given a lot of options around. And then the thing about it too is that there's just not a lot of really good, and when I say not a lot, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word, right? Because there are really good business teachers out there, but there's also not a lot of really good examples of business being run a different way in the context of our society. And I think a part of that is because, as we were talking about earlier, so much of current business model advice is, well, for one, one could call it disenchanted, so to speak. There's not this deeper understanding of the spiritual underpinnings of business and the marketplace, one might say. You know, in a lot of spiritual cultures, let me say a lot, in several spiritual cultures that I've encountered, it's understood that the marketplace is in some ways that there's a metaphysics to a marketplace, and this continuous exchange of resources, or one might say currency, and ideas and products and services. And so, and also that there's all this factory-based programming, all of this corporation-based programming that works for corporations, that people bring into business. And so if you're not shown a different way, then how are you supposed to know that there is a different way? I mean, some people, some rare individuals can figure that out, but I think that it's unfair to expect everyone to. So I think that what we need is in some sense is a revolution, one might say, in terms of how we approach business. And I think that it's in some ways simply mirrored in the deeper changes that these types of movements that we're a part of are seeking to create. You know, it's how do we more fully bring business into that, and understand the broader impact that our business creates. Yeah. Not just in what we're doing, but in how we do it, right? It's not just about, oh, like I'm making a difference with the business, like in terms of the work, but it's like at every level of the business. Each part of it is alive in a sense, and it's transmitting something. And so what are we bringing to the table with what we do and how we do it?
Absolutely.
And the worldview behind why we're doing it.
It's something I often say, which is being your medicine is one of the deepest forms of spiritual work. And by that, I mean, particularly in this modern culture, for all the reasons we're talking, you know, like in order to not just kind of, you know, have a business doing something, but to fully inhabit, you know, whatever that medicine we've come here to be, to really work through all of the wounding and the conditioning that's going to have to, as kind of kink, you know, like be fearful in the way that we interact with people, see people as like leads and prospects rather than, you know, people in our community. That there's a kind of a deeper invitation there, I think, that sometimes is missed. That's what I mean by it. It's not just being able to, you know, serve people really powerfully with our gifts. It's all of the other parts that you're talking about there. It's like, how do we show up in those relationships, in each and every dynamic that we have with someone, every creation, every program, every email that we send? Is like, what's that calling us into? What healing work does that require of us? Which goes back again to, I think we've touched on this, but I think you said it before we started recording about how just that idea that we've come so far away from like this idea, this sort of like egregore really of like business, rather than like simplicity of like, this is my role in the community. And it's just like, oh my goodness, you know, the just there's something just so beautiful and simple, and we just like come back to ourselves as like, it's just my role in the community.
Yeah, I love that you said that. That has been a meditation for me also, that I've been attempting to orientate around. Is in some ways I think of it as my function, and my function inside the context of life on this planet. And so for me, at least, the way that I try to orientate towards that, it's a metaphor that I really enjoy, is that of being a cell. That I am a cell in the body of of humanity, so to speak, and even really the body of life, and that it's my function, right? It's finding my innate function and making that work. So, I appreciate that you said that. Yeah.
We're starting to come close to the end of this, which is absolutely shot by, and it's definitely a conversation I could just keep going. But
Me too.
making sure that we do kind of really cover the parts that we think are important. What occurs to you as something that we haven't touched upon yet, or that you would just like to go a bit deeper on?
Well, I know that what we talked about that we didn't touch on was creativity and how
Mm.
and the creative capacity, and that's something that has been showing up for me as well. And I don't know if you want to go into that though, because that could be its own complete stream. Um,
Maybe drop a little teaser, and then maybe you do have to come back and do a part 3 on that.
well, I know that for me, and again, I'll reference my teacher for Baker Fatimisa. A big part of what he talks about is creativity as spiritual practice, right? And he means certain things when he says that. I know that I've done my own exploration around it, and so I'll reference what I've explored on my end of things, more so than what he talks about. But for me, it's been a challenge to orientate around creativity in a way that is not colored by business at this stage in my life. So what I
Love
mean
that.
by that, yeah, it's I suppose so. I guess stepping back a little bit, I honestly believe, or one might say I apprehend, that a part of our purpose here as living creatures is to help complete creation. And so we're a part of the creative process of divinity. And that if, everything that you see around you, for example, of this computer, these ideas, it's all a part of us helping complete creation. It's interesting because it's really easy to think about in our culture because of the isolated dynamics. It's easy to think about almost like being a player inside of a video game who's like playing with mold or something like that, or playing with clay or something along those lines, like an RPG game. But when we realize that we are as much a part of the universe as gravity is, that means that our creations are a part of the flow of the universe itself coming out to us, and that is inherently what we're here to do, is to help complete that creative process. And so I've been more and more doing my best to relate to my creative forces in that way, which is interesting because then you run into all sorts of other layers of suppression and conditioning around what wants to be created through you. And that is in its own such an enormous challenge, because the way you relate to creativity, to your creativity, is the way you relate to creation. And so yeah, I've been in that same sort of challenge myself, because again, when you run a business and you have a life and you do all the things that humans are asked to do, where is the room for creativity for its own sake, that is not necessarily there purely from a monetary or business-based perspective. And I'm not saying that those creations can't be brought into that context. It's just that
but it's not the reason. Yeah, it's not. It's like where it's being generated from. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure we can have a whole conversation about this. I love it, but it's particularly, keeping us semi on track as we bring this to a close. I think it is that how the two kind of overlap, this the conversation we've been in around business and money, and this conversation opening around creativity is like, my goodness, it's like already all the stuff at play that we've been talking about in business, and then like you bring that on top of creation, and like, my goodness, that's a lot to wade through, isn't it? Like, and so many, I mean, we are just creative beings, all humans, but I think so many, certainly the clients and students that we work with, so many of them, there is a kind of a very conscious kind of like drive to create that does get distorted by this idea of like, is it productive? Is it actually acceptable? Is it going to make me money? And so it kind of is like another place that we need to do some detangling, a lot of detangling.
Sure. Yeah. So the one thing I'll add to that is that, and this is in no way, believe me, it's in no way to demean anyone, but I think that a lot of people think that they're being original or something like that with their creations, but really what's happening is it's just replicating and repeating a lot of what they already encounter, and that they become a host, so to speak, for uh, the same cultures and cultural ideas that they want to move against. And basically they just end up, as I said, being replicators of the same thing. So being able to really dive deep to find the true creative source, I think, is perhaps a place to explore. I kind of think of it like volcanism. That what I'm almost looking for is like the spirit of volcanism in a way. It's this truly raw, untethered, creative force that wants to move through us, that is not being warped and kinked, one might say, to replicate more of the same. You see it all the time. You go on Instagram, and everybody sounds like everybody else. And you look at conversations on YouTube, and almost everybody sounds like everybody else. And really finding like true creativity, people who are doing something that's truly unique to them, that only they could do, is not as common. And when you do find that, it's awesome, because you're finding living work.
Life.
Work. Yeah, that living work.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people, when they encounter the living work, they recognize it. Oh, like, this sounds different. This something hits different about this. Yeah. So I think that there's a difference between being creative and being productive. I mean, you can warp creative energy to be replicative, or you can allow creative energy to be this raw, wild force that it wants to be. Which, yeah, it's a special challenge in today's time.
There's part of me that really wants to respond to that. I'm going to say it really briefly, and then we are going to have to do like a dot for next time. But what I'm feeling more and more is the closer we become to kind of just being moved by spirit, which I feel like you could also say kind of be moved by kind of how creation wants to move through us. More and more, and I'm not saying, I'm anyway like done on that. This is an ongoing adventure, but there's definitely been a kind of like a deepening into that kind of like, okay, this is what's meant to be coming through. It's like, that's something that you can trust. And I feel like is the heart of, this, our role, our destiny, as you described it, is kind of like, there's a deeper intelligence that wove into us and how we are being this kind of completion of creation, that more and more there's this just like, yeah, it's all happening as it's going to, if we can just allow that.
Yeah, beautifully said. I'm doing my best myself to align with that. Yeah.
This has been fabulous conversation. It was definitely the right one for us. And we'll definitely come back and dive in more on all things creativity. I can really feel there's a lot of juice in that conversation. For now, where can listeners find more about you and your work and your book and all of that good stuff?
Yeah, they can visit me at theancestralnow.com, and my book is The Ancestral Now, which is available pretty much everywhere that books are sold.
Excellent. I'm sure I said this last time, but I just think the name is so good.
Thank you. Thank you very
Great
much.
work
Yeah.
on that. Thank you so much. This has been fabulous. And until next time, I hope,
Okay, thank you, Lian.
yeah, I can't wait until we're back again.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.